thanks everyone for joining. We've all had a busy week, I think, after a couple of weeks or a week in Madrid. Lots of people taking some time off this week, but we have had some really good discussions about the academy. Last week in Madrid, as I think I mentioned, we had the big kind of debrief meeting and to discuss where we like to take things further. And we're all really, really happy with the way things have gone. And then really the idea for taking it further is just to make it more structured and a little bit more professional and slick in all the things that we want to do. We'd really like, as I mentioned before, to increase the task list, fourfold or fivefold, so that it has a huge scope of tasks. And we realize that we've got to carry on keeping tasks to keep that kind of issue list fed, because we've already had 2022 contributions finished through the academy. I mean, to that end, we actually did a presentation to the whole company, which is quite, this is the engineering side of the company, which is quite sizable now, and asked people to directly get involved with their open source projects, invite open source projects to get involved. So we're quite hopeful we'll be able to increase the number of people that are joining, both in terms of creating the issues that we can look after and in terms of helping us. There are many more technical authors now at Canonical who can help, and everybody that we speak to about the idea is very enthusiastic. So the kind of first 3 months have felt like the bootstrapping phase and proving that it can all work, and we all very much think that it is working. I'm excited to take it further. For a long time, I've promised to put up a schedule of what we'd like to do in these office hours. I haven't quite done that, but I did create 2 posts today. One post is basically an index of all the documentation office hours that we've done so far, which is something like 10 or 11 or 12 of them. We've recorded each of these and we've put them on the Ubuntu on our YouTube channel. And so that index now can act as a kind of a reference of all the things that we've covered, because we've covered some quite interesting things, I think, that are going to be useful for people and could be really easily lost. Things like the overview of the Git process that we use, the kind of forking and cloning, creating branches, making edits and pushing back the pull requests, and also the discussions we've had on documentation testing, and the Q&A panel that we had 2 weeks ago when we were in Madrid. I think that was one of my favorites because it was so unplanned. To go along with that index, I've created the schedule post, which I hope to kind of populate with the ideas that we're going to cover in the short term. So I put today's in there, for example, and by this time next week, it'd be great to have a few more in there so that you can at least see what we're going to cover in the next office hours. Beneath that schedule table, I've put a list of all the ideas that we had when we were trying to brainstorm things that we'd like to cover in the office hours. They've not been scheduled into the table, but please take a look at those ideas in the post. I can put the links here, but I'll put the links. They're on the forum, on the Discourse forum. There's loads of ideas. If there's things you'd like us to talk about or people you'd like us to invite into these office hours, let us know and we'll try our best to get them in. I mean, one person I realized we've really underused in all of this is Daniele, who created the Diataxis structural framework that all of us use. And it'd be great to be able to invite him to talk about some of his thoughts around Diataxis, and also, things that I know we get quite often is the difference between a how-to and a tutorial. Those kind of questions, and we can ask him. And also, he's great at demonstrating this stuff. We can perhaps work on some documentation together with Daniele to see kind of best approaches to this. Just some of the other ideas. There's a lot there. So if there's anything you're interested in, flag them in that post and we'll prioritize them in terms of office hours. As ever, please feel free to ask questions. For this one, I thought it would be useful because the live demos seem to work quite well. So I think in the future, like live demos and the Q&A panels that we do are a good template for these office hours. We'll always have the Q&A sessions for people who may have questions related to the Academy and Canonical's documentation. So please always feel free to bring those up. But for today, I thought it'd be really useful to demonstrate, one, how we use Discourse for documentation by showing you how it actually works, both the kind of input and then the output, if you ever want to contribute to the Discourse documentation. And then 2, something that Ruth, actually a technical author at Canonical, created and has now created a big momentum behind it, is something called the Sphinx-Starter-Pack. This is an open source project, which is basically a repository that contains everything you need to get started using Sphinx. It's like the complete package. With just a single command, you can start building a set of documentation yourself from this repository. And we use it across Canonical for dozens of separate projects with their own sets of documentation, which we actually publish on Read the Docs. So there are 2 sides to the way that we publish documentation. The product-centric documentation is currently published via Discourse, which is the open source forum software. And the more kind of developer-centric documentation is published using this Sphinx-Starter-Pack as a starting base, and then to read the docs eventually. So I was going to demonstrate both of those things to give you an idea of how they work, but also there's never an ideal process. These things, we're always in endless discussions about how best to approach these, or modify them, or dump them and switch to something else. So even when you have the best plans, it never works out perfect. So neither of these are perfect. They have their faults, but these are things that we're working with. And I think, speaking to a lot of technical writers and a lot of technical authors, is a common experience that we all have such firm ideas about how we'd like to handle and publish documentation, and yet there are very few places that we could use as kind of exemplars of having put that into practice. So we've got a lot of room for improvement as well. If there are no questions or anyone would like to ask that, I'll share my screen. I'm sorry, the questions and the meat is on my right, so if I'm looking over there, right, let's share the screen. Oh, this is so yeah, so this actually is, I was just going to refer to the 2 posts. This is the Open Documentation Academy forum on Discourse, and the 2 posts that I created today, one was the index with all of our office hours, with a brief with the title of basically all the recordings, and then a link directly to the YouTube video for each recording. The one, for example, that Kitana did last Friday when we were just leaving Madrid is there. I only uploaded that today, so sorry that's late. And then the kind of companion to the index is the schedule. So I've put in for today, for example, the demonstration of Discourse and Sphinx doc systems. And we're going to fill this out, and beneath this are all the ideas that we kind of brainstormed. But if you want to leave a comment beneath here, tell us the ones you'd like to see, or the ones you'd like us to prioritize, or in fact your own ideas. We'd love to incorporate them. So I'll start with the discourse-based documentation. This is something that I work with because I look after the Snap documentation. I've covered this a little bit before, but Discourse, I mean, we've just seen this is Discourse. It's the forum software that's used by many open source projects. It's used by Canonical a great deal for lots of different things. It's where people can go. It's the new kind of PHP BB for people who maybe remember that. It's the way where you have topics and discussion and comments and things like that. And we use it as a kind of the source for documentation. So this is the published documentation for Snap. Here's the quick start tour for Snap, for example. There's no real indication here that this has been published by Discourse, from Discourse. But if you go to the very bottom, you get this link, help improve this document in the forum, and it goes to a forum post. This forum post is the source material for the Discourse, for the ultimate documentation. It's in the docs category of the forum. So nearly all of the posts in the docs category are actually pages in our documentation. If I create another page like this, The Snapcraft one doesn't update particularly quickly, actually, but Discourse posts are in Markdown. If we edit the post, you can see this. It's a bit difficult. There is a single view, I think, but this is just simple Markdown structured text. There's a table here with links, and you can see if I put in a test and then save it. This on the published documentation on the right, whenever the page is updated, it will actually show that text live as it's been added. And this is the way a lot of us work with our product documentation. In fact, Discourse itself, it's not that difficult to accomplish because it actually, I think it's and then the name. If it's got a good API, but there's a special URL with raw in the title that will give you the raw markdown text for each of these posts, and there's an equivalent for simple markup like HTML that the web team at Canonical has created some tooling around to basically add the CSS, the styling that we use to then publish it to the top documentation, which is what you see here. We use the same styling across all of the sites at Canonical to create consistency. And you can see here that this is a test has now already appeared in the live documentation for the site. So I have to make sure that I check everything that's added to the documentation there, because people are free to make their own changes. This is kind of the concept behind discourse-based documentation. It's the idea that people can engage in it as a shared kind of product and understanding. So there's nothing stopping anybody helping with the documentation by making those changes. Something I wanted to highlight, because this is such an uncomfortable interface to work with if you want to write sizable pieces of documentation in Discourse. This, for example, the split view, I can't remember, but there is a way of getting rid of the split view, is a tool that was actually created by somebody at Canonical called Discedit. I'll put this is the repository for it. I'll put the link in the notes for this. And Discedit basically opens up the page in your favorite text editor. So if I type Discedit, and then I've got the URL for the forum post, the quick start tool. And this is the same contents, but it's loaded up in whatever your favorite text editor is. And you can see it's got this as a test from where I just added it. So I'll delete that now and save it. And it might take a moment to update actually on the published page, but if I go to the forum post, it will already have gone. And that's basically all there is to it. There's some special magic that goes on for the navigation for this part on the left, and also in choosing which pages are published. And that's on, if you can see here, I'm at the kind of root, the /docs of the documentation. And this page is a special one on the forum, special in that only a few of us can edit it, because it includes in the table the navigation of all the pages we want to be published as part of the documentation. Simple 3 columns with the level in the navigation that we want it, 0 being the top level, the URL that we'd like the documentation to appear on, and then a link to the forum post for each one of those pieces of documentation. So they're all listed here. There's another small table beneath this that basically acts as, there's a lot of pages in Snap documentation. This redirects basically is when we deprecate the URL and we want to redirect people from an old URL to the new URL. So when things change, and often things are renamed, we'll do that. For links in Discourse, some of these are older links. They've got the entire URL here. But in fact, all you actually need for this to work is the / and then the number of the post. The number here is the unique identifier. And it often works out better to do it that way with just the number, because if this naming part, like the OpenGL interface, changes, as long as the number's there, even on its own, it'll always find the link. And that's pretty much all there is to the Discourse documentation. I was going to show the Sphinx-Starter-Pack, because it's if I was still starting an open source project and wanted to accompany that with some documentation, regardless of it being started at Canonical, I think it's a great way to get started. It gives you everything you need. If you're aware of Sphinx, it's a very powerful system. It's incredibly flexible. It can bend to your will in lots of different ways, and it's a great way of you can have submodules in it. You can incorporate documentation from other documentation sets. You don't have to like repeat yourself all the time in terms of linking, and you have a lot more control over styling. The text format is usually restructured text, but the starter pack is set up to use something called MIST, which will also interpret markdown files. So markdown and RST files can be used alongside one another. So I was going to show briefly how you kind of get up and running and started with the Sphinx-Starter-Pack. This is a repository that anybody can access. So I'll just move into the build directory in my terminal. And then I hope this is all visible. Just like we did before when we showed how to use Git, I'm not going to fork the repository this time because I'm not going to push back my own changes. So I'm just going to clone it. Clone Ruth's actual repository to start off with. So I've copied that to my local folder in here in build Sphinx. So this is a copy of what we can see on GitHub here. On the left is my local copy and what's in there, and on the right is the GitHub repo. So we don't really need that anymore. It's set up to include everything you need to get up and running. And in fact, you can get up and running by type make because this is based around a Makefile, which is an old Linux Unix way system of basically running scripts. If it's not in the Makefile directly, actually, if you look at the Makefile, it's basically directing us to a file called makefile.sp. And Makefiles can get convoluted and difficult to parse easily, but they basically contain scripted elements for doing things according to the commands that you invoke through the make. You don't need to worry about this. But when I type make run, for example, it will run the run component in that Makefile that we just looked at, which is basically install all the dependencies and run whatever build commands have been instructed to build the documentation. Because I've run this before, it's probably installed all the dependencies before. Password. And it's installing them. And Sphinx is Python based. It's very Python-like syntax if you're going to use RST. One of the dependencies here is the virtual environment. So nearly everything Python these days runs within a virtual environment, so that anything else Python remains untouched by what you end up doing in here. And when it's successfully built, right at the very bottom here, you can see serving on http://127.0.0.1, which is localhost. That's the IP address for the machine that I'm running this on to itself, and it's on port 8000. That's because as part of the make run script in the Makefile, not only is it building the documentation, it's also running the simple Python web server that Python includes to be able to host the files and for you to see them. So if I open up this on the right in the browser, 127.0.0.8 and the port 8000, this is the documentation being hosted directly from the repository that I've just built and make run against. The navigation is just a little bit lost on the left there. It's actually in this drop-down menu here. There's only one thing, which is the README. I'll just quit that because I want to run this in tmux. Hold on a sec. Tmux, if anyone is unfamiliar with it, it's like Screen. It allows you to split up your terminal into different consecutive tasks. And I'm doing this so that I can do make run in the background and get my password right. It's funny how doing this live, I forget the simplest of things. So I'll do Rakeman because one of the very neat things about this is that the make script watches the contents of the repository for changes in the files, and if it detects a change in the file, it rebuilds it automatically. So if I go to it's the wrong file. I need this readme.rst. This. Where's the file? Oh, it's okay. This is actually the README in here. So if I edit something here and put this is a test, for example, the make run script has automatically detected that that file has changed and has rebuilt the documentation, and you can see it's already refreshed and updated here on the right. And this is a really great way of working if you want to see how something looks, which is an important consideration when you're doing things like sentences and paragraphs, to see the depth, the density of information, because too dense and it's overwhelming and people just won't read it. I mean, this is why we often break up. You can see this is a great example of breaking things up into very small sentences and paragraphs to make it clear and easy to pass. Sometimes you can't do that, but writing in this way with a preview of the output is a great way of getting a feel for that. So I mentioned Markdown before. If I create test.markdown, create a tile, this is a test. Well, the way that Sphinx works is there's an index, and you can see that the README is here that we just looked at. If I say hello world here, and then you don't need to put, it's a bit difficult to see with the purple, sorry, but what did I actually call that? What was it? Sorry?
Test.
Test, thank you. So I called it test.md, but you don't need to put the extension. I'll save that, it'll rebuild, and it's not there. Maybe I have to call this test. And it's still not there. I wonder if the...
I think that's the table C.
Sorry, I can't hear.
Have you included it in the TOC?
In the index. The index.rst.
I think that's what Kirtan was saying, and yeah.
Yeah. This is so typical. I'm not quite sure what I'm getting wrong here. I think what it is I'm in the README. If I go to, yeah, it's because I'd already gone one level down into the README, whereas the starter pack is the landing page. And so I was editing the index.rst file in the starter pack level of the hierarchy. There's actually the README is at a level lower. So I was trying to see if I should have added it to a subset of the navigation. Sorry for the confusion on that. But the idea is that you can add subdirectories with your documentation in, you can add them in RST or Markdown, and the starter pack will build all this together. Another neat feature I'll do is we also, Robert and Andrea previously have talked about testing, and this includes all the tests. If I open up the README again, and if I add, So there's the spelling tests, there's inclusive language tests, there's tests for certain kinds of URLs, clever tests using Veil that basically check for the formatting of specific things like URLs. So if I spell something wrong, I'll try that, spell something wrong, save it. Now those tests aren't running by default. They have different make invocations. But if I do in the terminal down here and make spelling, you'll see that the build failed, and here it's detected my spelling mistake that I added. Oops, I've just done the copy and paste. And so the idea is that you build, not only can you run these tests locally to make sure that what you're writing passes everything, that when you put these projects back into a GitHub repository, you can run those tests as part of your CI process, and and things will fail to be, you can stop things from being merged into your documentation if they don't pass these tests, so that you don't add documentation that has spelling mistakes, or you don't add documentation where a link doesn't work, for example. And we have tests for all of those things as part of the starter pack. That's really, I didn't want to go too deep into it, but if you've got a project where you're thinking of starting with some documentation and you'd like to get started with a very simple but powerful system, then the starter pack is a really great way to do it, I think. So I will stop sharing this. Demo demons, yeah. I always seem to get it wrong. I mean, not only did I forget my password, but I think, you know, forgetting the git commands before, I quite like putting myself in that situation, but it's always, something always happens. Are there any questions about this process while I'm still recording that anybody would like to ask? Yeah, Katana, go for it.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me better now. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it would be useful if we can touch upon how we keep track of contributions and Discourse versus Sphinx. It's really straightforward in Sphinx with GitHub or anything, but in Discourse, people may not be aware.
So yeah, I can show you. So I don't know how everybody else does this. Let me share my screen again. But if I go back to the Snap Discourse, we typically get notifications here about all of the edits that people have made. So I can see, for example, that Mr. Cal has made edits to the Snapcraft release notes. And then if I go to that directly, you can actually see what they've changed. It's basically a diff view. So this is the old version on the left, and this is the new version on the right. And you can see that they've added an upcoming to here for Snapcraft, the release of Snapcraft 8.2.8. That's showing it as HTML, but there's also the raw diff view, the extra line that they've added to the table. So really, I just make this part of my routine, going through the notifications. I know where I've got to previously, so I can see what's been added. Is that what you meant, Katana?
Yeah. Thanks.
It's not a great way of doing it. Those of us who are kind of managing Discourse docs just need to make it part of our routine. I think the queue's in order. So I think, Peter, you raised your hand first.
Yeah, thanks. With the Discourse documentation, there doesn't seem to be much of a sort of a gatekeeping there. With the Sphinx documentation, there's the whole, GitHub pull request and whatever involved. I see you can go and look to see what has changed in the Discourse documentation, but it just seems a bit strange that there's no sort of approval before it gets published.
Yeah, it's a real weakness of the system, honestly. The Discourse itself has a trust level, so people can only contribute changes to that if the page is set to be a wiki, which is something that a moderator can do. So if I have a look at this page, for example, this is already set to be a wiki. If it's a wiki, then anybody with a certain trust level in discourse will be able to make changes to that. To get that trust level, they need to, I've documented this in the contributing to our docs page. You need to have spent some time replying to comments and creating topics and basically reaching a certain level that hopefully bots or bad actors can't do. And we haven't really had any problems, but it's not ideal. It is a dangerous, it could potentially be dangerous or a risk. We obviously have backups and we could restore if we needed to, and we'd need to reconsider this policy if it didn't work. There are other documentation sets that use Discourse that don't have posts set to a wiki, and in those cases then only a moderator and the original topic owner can edit them, which is a bit more of a gatekeeper, but neither of them are perfect, and it's because I think Discourse wasn't developed to be a source for documentation. Was it Dimalola? Did you have your hand up previously? I seem to have lost the cache of.
Oh yeah, I did. Regarding Discourse, yeah, one of the reasons why I've never tried contributing to documentation with this, because I haven't really been able to log into it ever since I created my account. I don't know if that's just a me issue or anyone else faced it. So whenever I try to log in, it takes me to Ubuntu 1 to try login there, and then from there, it just shows me. It just keeps saying the software encountered an unexpected problem. So I don't know if it's a me issue or someone else is facing that.
I've not experienced that, but I think probably outside of this meeting, I really don't mind helping you personally to get that sorted out. Did you create an account? Is this on Snapcraft?
No. Okay, so what happened was I saw one of your posts on Discourse, and then I tried commenting, and it was like, okay, you have to create an account. And then when I did that, it redirected me to Ubuntu 1 to create an account there. I created a Ubuntu 1 account, and since then I could never log in.
Okay, I think maybe if you let me, I'll try and help you out with that account problem. The reason why I asked about Snapcraft is because it's outside of the Ubuntu 1 domain, so it could be that you create an account on there. I can check, but I can't. I won't. I better not do it while I'm showing my screen, and I can certainly sort out your account details. So I'll try and do that as we finish this.
I appreciate that. Thanks a lot.
Usman, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, hello.
Hey, hello.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. So actually, my question is specifically to like this, the Discourse-Starter. So I mean, like I was like looking through the list of issues like currently on the documentation academy, but like I mean, like most of them were like probably like choosing it right now. So there was like 2 new issues. So I comment on one of them now. I think someone actually like tagged you to like look into the issue. So I commented on it that if there is any opportunity like after you discuss after the discussion that I can try like work on it. But like specifically to this the document starter, like this Sphinx document starter. So like I saw some issues there because I already like worked once there. So like I saw some issues which I'm interested in. So I don't know if I can answer like but like they are not listed on the documentation academy issues. So can I like take some of the issues from these things starter?
I'm sorry, I didn't really catch the end of that. What was the final question?
So like the final question is so like there are some issues on the Sphinx document starter, but they are not listed on the documentation academy issues. So I'm asking if I can also like take some of them because I already like worked previously on the doc starter software.
Well, I mean, actually, I mean, this is great. So the things that we identify for the academy are issues that we feel are going to be are going to be accessible for people, and that are issues that we don't think we're going to get to ourselves within the short term. But the idea behind the academy is very much to kind of empower and encourage people to go to other projects and contribute to them. And so if you're seeing issues that are listed here in the Sphinx Starter Pack that aren't in the academy, it's an open source project, and by all means, you know, get involved. If you'd like to see it added to the Academy, then maybe leave a comment on that and we can do that. But there's nothing stopping you just diving in and trying to fix things yourself if you'd like to.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that.
No problem. If there are no other questions related to this, I'm going to stop the recording and give everyone a chance to ask any other questions they may have outside of what we'll put on YouTube. But thanks for being patient with me, and thanks for the questions. Okay. Let me move this back onto the display in front of me. So is there anything anyone else would like to bring up outside of what we've talked about, or things that they didn't want to bring up while we had the recording going? I don't have anything else particularly to share. Yeah, did you want to say something, Robert? I don't know if the...
Oh, no, sorry about that.
Oh, no, it's fine. One thing that we've talked about today is trying to present the idea of the Academy outside of Canonical at some conferences or other. So if there's anything that you'd like to see us at, let us know. Or if there's anything you'd like to present on our behalf, let us know. I'm just looking at our notes from the debrief meeting that we had as well. For the office hours, we're going to try and rotate between a group of people, and we may change the time zones a little bit as well to accommodate where those people are and where people may also want to better watch this or interact with it, I must say, because we'll still always do the recordings. The other thing that came from everybody's really just pleased with the way things are going. We were going to add a few more labels, and I think one of the biggest things that we've not quite decided on is how best to approach the recognition that people deserve when they've started, when they've made some contributions, because we don't really want to make it a reward, although we may be able to do that as well, but we really want to make it like an official kind of recognition of the effort and the kind of commitment something has required. You know, we've talked about kind of the equivalent of certification or kind of GitHub flares or labels or things that people can actually add that will make a difference to what they want to do in their resumes or CVs or in other open source projects. So that's still a little bit to be decided, but it's something that we really want to get sorted out soon. But apart from that, yeah, we're still pleased with the way that everything's going, and I don't really have anything else. So if there are no questions, maybe we could just move on to the weekend. And I'll say thank you again so much for joining. It's always so humbling. I hope you have a great weekend, and see you this time next week.